But tonight we have Michael McLeod joining us. He's the founder of GrowNOW ADHD LLC, a specialized practice in Media, Pennsylvania that provides ADHD and executive function therapy, parent coaching, speech language therapy, evaluations, and more. Michael is an ADHD and executive function specialist. He's ASHA certified speech language pathologist, the creator of the executive function internal language model, executive function specialist with the Focus Foundation. He's a professional speaker and international trainer, and the co-host of Parenting ADHD podcast and the co-host of Education Chapter Chat podcast. Sounds like a busy guy and someone that we can all learn a lot from. So I'm very excited to welcome you here with us, Michael. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'm so excited to be here with you all, and thank you to Y River School. You guys have been great to work with and interact with. A really fantastic program they have going on there. My name is Michael McLeod. I'm an ADHD and executive functioning specialist. And this is exactly what I do. This is my passion. I travel the country and internationally, training school districts, large group, different organizations, parents on the most up-to-date research on ADHD and executive functions. I truly believe that ADHD and executive functioning are the most misunderstood neurodevelopmental disorder. We'll talk about the old, outdated research, what the new research is telling us, and exactly really what we should do moving forward. We have one short hour. I typically train school districts over, 8-hour days, multiple weeks, but we can, go through some of the basic information and kind of see where we go from there. So like we said, I'm the owner of GrowNOW ADHD. You can find me on Instagram at GrowNOW ADHD, and my website is GrowNOW ADHD. I always like to put a picture of my daughter Eden on there. That's her when she first sat up. She's 2 years and 2 months now, but it's one of my favorite pictures of her. So we have her there and me as well. Awesome. So I love to start my presentations with this great quote. It would be nice if you would leave your behavior at school so distracted and absent-minded. All your poor interest in all that I teach set a bad example for the whole class. So this is a great way to start off the topic of tonight. And this is a quote said about the one and only Albert Einstein. So things turned out pretty well for him with his ADHD. And I love the work of Dr. Benjamin Bloom, the educational psychologist. What any person in the world can learn, almost all persons can learn if provided with appropriate prior and current conditions of learning. So the research study on the GrowNOW internal language model took place over an entire school year at the Stratford Friends School right outside of Philadelphia in Newtown Square. And I like to give a nice shout out to my references at the beginning of the presentation so that, you start to see who I'm referencing and who my sources are, because this field of ADHD and executive functioning is so small. It's such a small little niche. So I refer to this list of people here as really like the Mount Rushmore of ADHD specialists. I'm sure many of you have heard of Sarah Ward, the fellow speech and language pathologist. She does tons of podcast interviews. Type her name into Google, type her name into YouTube. Her work is absolutely incredible. Find her at efpractice.com. I believe she's based out of the Boston area. She just does absolutely incredible work. And a lot of her treatment model, her 360 treatment model for executive functioning has really become a gold standard. And it's really great work that she does. In terms of the worldwide leader on ADHD, that would be Dr. Russell Barkley. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Russell Barkley. Check out his information, read his books, read his research. He is second to none in the field of ADHD. He's done more for this field than anybody ever has or anybody ever will. He has tons of books published, research published. Check him out. He's the best of the best. The next is Ryan Wexelblatt, the ADHD dude, a great friend of mine, the other co-host of the Parenting ADHD podcast. He puts out incredible content. He has a great parent membership site where he trains parents on how to work with their kids with ADHD and executive functioning challenges. So check him out at ADHDdude.com and ADHDdudecourses.com. And tonight we'll be talking about a lot of the most up-to-date research on ADHD and executive functioning. And it's really this Harvard group, the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, they're the ones that are really on the forefront of the great research that's happening. So they're doing some incredible work. So check them out. Check out the Harvard Center, and they've done some incredible work to really reframe what is ADHD and executive functioning. Awesome. And then the number one thing that I really truly believe, that whether it's the psychologists or psychiatrists, whoever it is who is diagnosing the child with ADHD, the very first thing that clinician, that professional should do is give that parent information on their local CHAD organization. CHAD is absolutely incredible, a national nonprofit organization based by county. So here in Philadelphia, we have Philadelphia CHAD, Chester County CHAD, Delaware County CHAD, Montgomery County CHAD. So it's all based on the area. So you can reach out to them, get free resources, do parent support groups. They do different hangout groups. It's a really great resource if you are a parent and you have a loved one with ADHD. Okay, so let's dive right deeply into this, into the great work of Dr. Russell Barkley and the Harvard Center of the Developing Child. What do we now know about ADHD? So overall, what we know from the great brain scan studies, CT studies, MRI studies, this is a true disorder of the brain. This is a true neurodiverse population because the brain is different in all three of the main areas. It is structured differently, it functions differently, and it develops slower. So over time, the brain develops from back to front. And that frontal lobe of the brain, the front part of the brain, is the last to develop, not typically fully developed in the neurotypical brain until between 25 and 30 years old. That's how long it takes. And the brain will develop much slower and differently in the ADHD brain. So these great brain imaging studies confirm that ADHD is a disorder of the brain, a true neurodevelopmental disorder, a delayed brain maturation, and the brain is structured differently and functions differently, causing these external symptoms that we have focused on for decades. And what that'll be a big theme of the presentation tonight is this transition from external to internal. So hopefully you can see my little rectangle there and this motion with my hands from external to internal. We're going to talk about that a lot tonight. So the prefrontal cortex within the ADHD brain, we have 3 to 10% reduced regional volumes in 5 separate regions. So these parts of the brain are smaller. It's a reduced volume in 5 separate regions. And the same parts of the brain impacted by ADHD in structure, function, and development are the same parts of the brain that deal with emotions, self-awareness, and self-regulation. So we're starting to put together a little bit of a pattern here. We're starting to gain the information. Okay, ADHD, focus, attention, hyperactivity, inattentiveness. Okay, but now, because of these great studies, we know that the parts of the brain affected are more emotional, more self-regulation based. We have the limbic system where we have the amygdala of the brain. That's the emotional center of the brain. It's much smaller in ADHD, so much more difficulty with regulating your emotions, which is what happens in the amygdala, where the amygdala is. Okay? The anterior cingulate part of the brain, where we make our social and emotional decisions, much less activation in the ADHD brain. Okay, so now we're seeing a social aspect. Now we're seeing social relationships impacted by ADHD. Very interesting. And there's much less activation within that frontal lobe overall. So as it's developing, it is being used less when in comparison to the neurotypical, typically developing peers. So what is happening within this prefrontal cortex? What do we now know what this prefrontal cortex does? So this prefrontal cortex, the last part of the brain to develop, communicates in network with all the other parts of the brain and it is a true social organ. It is responsible, and it is the home, it is the hub of our social relationships. One great way to think of the prefrontal cortex is it is a giant Excel spreadsheet in your brain, or a Google Sheets for all you young people out there. It's a Google Sheets Excel spreadsheet list in your brain of every single person you've met, who is your friend, who's your acquaintance, how do they make you feel, how do you make them feel, what do they owe you, what do you owe them. It's a great way to keep track of your various relationships. And that all happens within the prefrontal cortex. So for years and years, we looked at ADHD, executive functioning, prefrontal cortex as hyperactivity, inattentiveness, time management, organization. We're now seeing the social aspects here. Okay. So what does this prefrontal cortex do that allows us to use our executive functioning system? So it's within this prefrontal cortex where humans are the only species on this planet that can sustain a behavior over time in the absence of a direct consequence. So human beings can work towards something right now in the moment, in the present moment, without a direct consequence right here staring them down in the face. We can do our college applications junior year of high school, even though it's not going to happen until 2-3 years down the road. We can work towards getting our driver's license, even though we're not going to be driving down the road. We can work towards something on Monday, even though it's not going to affect us until the weekend or later that month or even later that year. And we are the only species that can do that. We can work towards something even though it's not going to affect us until the future, the distant future, a delay. And why are we able to do that? Is because humans have the ability to pause. We have the ability to stop and think, which is the most vague phrase of all time, right? We're going to dive deep into that phrase, stop and think, and figure out what it really means. It really means stop and use your executive functioning. We'll dive into that. But in this pause, we can stop and we can aim our behavior towards the future. So we can stop ourselves from what we would have done on impulse and do something differently right now that's going to benefit us later. And that is a human-based skill. Aiming our behavior towards the future, being a future thinker. We are able to create and sustain motivation over time, even with a delay. So we can build motivation right now. We can work towards a diet plan, a fitness plan, an academic plan, a social plan, whatever it is. We can set goals for ourselves, even if we're not going to reap the benefits of that work until the future. And that's the foundation of our executive functioning system. So executive skills, I'm using this term ADHD and executive functioning pretty interchangeably so far, right? So executive skills have been identified as the foundation that all children need to negotiate the demands of childhood and adolescence. So these are the true life independent skills. This is the greatest predictor of success that we have for the human species. Executive functioning skills, not grades, not IQ, not a college degree. It is executive functions are the greatest predictor of success that we have. And they're needed in childhood, adolescence, and full for independent adulthood. And these skills become even more critical as kids get older and they're expected to do more, and the parents and the adults are expected to fade back. So as we have decreasing parental supervision and guidance, we have really young kids that have to be supervised at all times, right? It's a safety issue. They need constant supervision. But as the supervision fades, we need these kids to be able to make healthy, positive, and safe choices on their own. And they can't do that without executive functions. And like I said earlier, these skills develop gradually during the first 2 decades of life, peaking at around 25 to 30 years old in the neurotypical brain. So really, here's a great way that Dr. Russell Barkley describes the ADHD brain. we are going to focus on the old, outdated view and look at the new view. Okay. So the old view was attention deficit, hyperactivity, and inattentiveness. Now let's look at this Dr. Barkley version of ADHD. So the back part of the brain is where we know, where we store our information, where we know what we have to do. When I walk into the library, I know I can't scream or run. When I walk into the classroom, I know I have to put my backpack down and sit down and do the do now and take my book out and get started. When my parents tell me to go clean my room before I have screen time, I have to go upstairs and clean it, and then I can do what I have to do. That's the knowledge part. Then we have the performance, where we show what we know, where we perform in the natural environment, where we get done what we know we have to get done. But ADHD splits the brain in half and splits these two things apart. And this is exactly why so many kids with ADHD have an average to above average IQ. We even have our twice exceptional population, right? Our advanced IQ that really struggle with executive functioning and social executive functioning. So they have an unbelievable IQ for their age, but they cannot function in the natural environment. They cannot perform. ADHD causes you to not be able to show what you know. And that's what it is. You know, the back of the brain knows, but the front of the brain doesn't allow you to perform and show what you know. And this is the foundation of why these kids are called lazy, troublemakers, non-compliant, all of those ridiculous names thrown out there. But ADHD splits the brain in half. So now we know ADHD is not an attention disorder. It's not about attention, and it's definitely not an attention deficit. If anything, these people have an abundance of attention. I have ADHD myself, in abundance of attention, where they're responding to all of the stimuli in the environment. They simply can't perform. It is a performance disorder. We are reframing this. Okay, so here's a great list here where I think everyone here tonight, looks like we got a good group of people so far. I like it. Okay, so take a look through this list right here and start to now, for the rest of this presentation, start to think about your loved ones with ADHD and how many of these do you see that you recognize, that you see on a daily basis. And you see on the bottom here, I have two things highlighted in bold, right? I have two things highlighted right here. Okay, every day looks the same for them. They go to school, they go home, they stay home, and a lack of diverse social experiences. This is one of the biggest red flags for parents of kids with ADHD. They try to create their small little executive dysfunction comfort zone, which 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10 involves video games and screens, right? Right? So when they try to control their day, sorry about that. When they try to control their day, they try to make every single day look the same. They don't want varied experiences. They don't want diverse social experiences. And we'll dive deeper into that. So in the past, executive functions in ADHD were looked at as an external behavioral-based disorder with an intensive, external behavioral-based disorder, heavy focus on hyperactivity, kids who can't sit still, behavioral-based, inattentive, kids who can't focus, behavioral-based. So everything was focused on what we could see with our eyes and what behaviors these kids showed externally. And executive functions had this heavy external focus. These kids can't organize. They can't organize their backpacks. They can't organize their folders. Their rooms are a mess. Their lockers are a mess. You open their school computer, they have 50 tabs open, right? With all the different games on it. So it was a heavy focus on external. And ADHD and executive function for a very long time were seen as a purely academic-based disorder. ADHD is going to affect you at school. executive functioning is going to affect you at school, right? So it's a purely academic-based disorder. And this heavy focus on external behavioral-based now led to the rise of this. And I'm sure many of these things look very familiar to many of you parents out there. We have this red clock here, which was marketed beautifully to parents of kids with ADHD. We have this watch that'll buzz and remind you to raise your hand and focus in class. Here on the top right corner, we have an FDA-approved iPad game that will improve your focus. Down here, we have a morning checklist, a reward chart, and a young boy using Alexa to give him reminders. So all of these external systems created to help strengthen executive functioning, because everything was seen as an external behavioral-based focus. But what do we now know is these external systems do not treat the internal executive functions, and they keep the kids prompt dependent. So what is your child going to take their red countdown clock to college with them and turn it every time they start an assignment, every time they have to get up in the morning, every time they have to go to office hours, right? Are they going to wear that clock, the buzz, when they go to college? Are they going to do reward charts? Every time they get an A+ freshman year of college, we're going to get them a video game. They're going to use Alexa for these things. This is what these external systems do. It is a temporary Band-Aid that keeps these kids prompt dependent. So this heavy focus on external behavioral based led to the rise of these non-certified executive function coaches. And literally anybody in the world can say, I'm an executive functioning coach, pay me to work with your child. There's no credentialing agency that says you're a coach, you're not. Anybody can do it. It's basically seen like tutoring. And the vast majority of these coaches will sit with your child, clean out their backpacks with them, organize their papers into folders, and sit with them while they work. And then what happens the second that coach walks out that door and goes home? Your child is right back to where they started. They don't have someone sitting there and watching them work to make sure they start their work, finish their work. Now the 80 tabs are back open. They're back to playing video games on their school computer again. And they're back to shoving papers into their backpack instead of appropriately putting it away. And for a very long time, we had social skills groups being assigned your very highly structured social skills group, applied behavioral analysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, the eye movement training, brain balance centers. So this heavy focus on ADHD as an external behavioral-based disorder led to all the different specialists sending these kids to all these different services and all these different clinicians and all these different ways to improve their executive functioning. And it got so crazy with all these ineffective therapies and lack of progress. You know, America now leads the world in first semester college dropouts. And a vast majority of that is the inability to bring executive functioning into schools, the heavy focus on constant standardized testing, and just IQ and academics, and not bringing executive functioning into the public school system. So kids will get accepted to college for the right reasons. They got the right grades, they'll get in, they did well on the tests, but they don't have the executive functioning to be successful once they get to campus. They don't know how to check their school email, make office hours, go to the library to get work done, put their phone away, put the video games away. And many of them with ADHD were sent to inappropriate therapies with lack of progress. And this got so intense that the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC had to come out and say, no, we're not recommending any of these things anymore. We are simply going to recommend medication management when appropriate for kids 5 and up, and parent training. Parent training is absolutely crucial to kids with ADHD and executive function. Those are the two big ones from the AAP and the CDC. But also now looking at actual structured executive functioning based therapy focused on internal long-term skill buildings instead of just accommodations, like we see in the typical 504 plan with with a seating in the front or ability to turn things in late or things like that. We're giving these kids accommodations, but we're not strengthening the internal skills. So, talking a lot about ADHD and executive functions, but there is a big push now to change this name of ADHD. This title of ADHD, Dr. Russell Barkley refers to it as the Rodney Dangerfield of neurodevelopmental disorders because it gets no respect. Every time a kid gets diagnosed with ADHD, they're instantly called lazy. Oh, just get that kid a coffee. Oh, he needs more discipline. He needs better parents. It's just the blame game once you hear ADHD. So we need to change this name because we also know it's not an attention disorder. It's not an attention deficit. It's not about hyperactivity. It's not about inattentiveness. So there's been a big push now to get this name changed in the DSM. So here are some of the names that have been thrown out there. Self-regulation deficit disorder, delayed gratification disorder, not really ringing a bell, not sounding too great. We can do a little bit better than that. Attention to the future disorder, that doesn't sound too good. That's not going to catch on. I don't think so. And here's one that's really caught on in some places. I believe this is from Dr. Ned Hallowell, vast variable attention stimulus trait. You can type that into Google. That's gotten a little bit of steam. But once again, the focus is again on attention stimulus trait. We need to dive a little bit deeper here. Okay. So now the big push is to reframe ADHD as EFDD, executive functioning developmental delay, or executive functioning developmental disorder. This is what we are now pushing. Sarah Ward, Dr. Russell Barkley, George McCloskey, all the great pioneers in this field want to see this name changed to an executive functioning disorder, executive functioning developmental delay. And I will quickly run through what the 4 pillars are. So in the past, it was hyperactivity and inattentiveness, but now we're going to look at these 4 main pillars and what they are founded upon. The first is self-regulation. So it's not about external hyperactivity and kids who can't sit still. It's internal self-regulation and the ability to regulate your emotions, your language, your body, your behavior in various environments towards various stimuli. This is so unbelievably important. Think about your child or your loved one with ADHD. And let's let's reframe it now from hyperactivity, inattentiveness, lack of focus to now an inability to self-regulate, to regulate your body, to regulate your emotions, to regulate your attention. It's an internal self-regulation deficit. So important. The next is self-awareness, the ability to be aware of your emotions, to be aware of how you present yourself to others, to be aware of your strengths and your needs, to really be able to understand who you are overall. So the ability to be aware of how you present yourself to others and be able to perceive your environment. Self-motivation towards non-preferred tasks. And this is so unbelievably important because I have told so many parents now that ADHD is about self-motivation, and they'll come back and say, no, he has no motivation issues. He'll play Minecraft for 10 hours, right? That's the preferred task. That's the self-stimulating task. That's the screen addiction, right? The ability to self-motivate towards homework, towards social experiences, towards getting a math worksheet done, towards exercise, towards outdoor play, towards joining a club after school or a sport, towards new experiences. That's what it's all about. Self-motivation towards new, challenging, and non-preferred tasks. Self-evaluation is the ability to learn from past experiences and apply it to the present moment. So we're not repeating the same mistake over and over and over again. We're learning from the past and applying it to the present moment so that we can not repeat mistakes. So right here, we have the 4 pillars of EFDD: self-regulation, self-awareness, self-motivation, self-evaluation, and they're all founded upon self-language. And we'll dive even deeper into that. But now you're starting to see this shift from external to internal. It's not about external behaviors. It's about internal executive functions. So yes, you can have executive functioning challenges and not have ADHD. There's executive functioning challenges with depression and bipolar and other mental illness and autism and other things. But ADHD in and of itself is the preeminent disorder of executive functions. And we know that from these brain scan studies. Okay. And there are 3 zones of executive function. So earlier I talked about how ADHD and executive function were looked at as simply an academic-based disorder. But now we know that there's also home executive functioning, which tends to present itself as self-regulation towards parents, and also the ability to initiate, persist, and complete non-preferred tasks in the home. And there's also social executive functioning, which tends to present itself as perspective-taking skills and understanding other people's thoughts, emotions, and intentions, and understanding the kinds of thoughts that you're putting into other people's heads when you may dominate a conversation or only want to talk about your preferred topic. There's also situational awareness skills, the ability to stand back and read the room. These are so ADHD and executive dysfunction will impact all areas of your life. There are many kids with ADHD that can do quite well socially with other gifts and strengths, but the vast majority of students we see really struggle in all 3 areas. So it's very important that we now define executive functioning. Let's define it, because the vast majority of time when you read a book on ADHD or executive functions, instead of giving you a definition of executive functions, they'll just list the skills. They'll have task initiation, time management, organization. A list of skills is not helping. We need a working definition. We need a definition of exactly what it is, okay? So let's define it, and I love Dr. Russell Barkley's definition. This is how he defines it. Executive functions are what we do to the self. We use our executive functions when we take an action to the self designed to change one's self, to change self's future. We use executive functioning when we stop responding to the external outside world around us and we focus on the self. We stop and we focus on the self. So from external to internal, when we stop and take an action to the self designed to change self, to change self's future. So executive functions are used when we stop self from what we would have done on impulse without stopping to think. So the best way to describe the ADHD brain is constant stimulus response. Stimulus response. There's a stimulus, respond to it. There's a stimulus, respond to it. And this is exactly why these kids are so prone to tech addictions and screen addictions. This is why they are so at risk to overconsumption of video games and screens and iPads and the internet and YouTube, because there is nothing more stimulus response than screens. It gives these kids instant gratification. It's the same thing as a slot machine to someone with a gambling addiction. It's the exact same thing. It's a true addiction. It's a drug to their brain. And the executive functioning system allows us to see a stimulus, ignore it, stop, and aim a behavior towards ourselves. So we see a stimulus, we see the Xbox right there, and we think about how fun it's going to be to play that Xbox, or we're on our school computer and we think to ourselves, man, it would be so much better to just watch a funny YouTube video right now. But we stop and we think, and we think, hey, I got too much work to do. I got too much to get done now. I'll do that stuff later in the future. That's the executive functioning system. Okay, so executive functions are used as an opportunity to turn away from the seductions of the moment and subject yourself to adversity and hardships to change a distant future. So we're turning away from the stimulus. We're subjecting ourselves to discomfort in the moment. We're self-regulating in the moment. and we are changing a distant future because we are future thinkers. We are able to see the future and feel the future. All deferred gratification, which is what we're doing, we're deferring gratification and going through hardships now, requires your ability to self-regulate in the moment. Okay? And how we measure executive functioning success, how we make sure that all of our students here at GrowNOW are gaining executive functions, we measure it from going from prompt dependence, reliance on adults, back to the self. So how prompt dependent are you on adults? How many prompts do you need for your morning routine? How many prompts do you need to get out the door in the morning? How many prompts do you need to get started on homework, get the homework done? How many prompts do you need to do something new and different and challenging on the weekend to get your chores done, to brush your teeth? Or how independent are you? Do you need 0 prompts? Are you doing these things yourself? So we measure, so when we write our goals for our students, it's Johnny will utilize self-regulation safety plan with fading prompts towards independence. So we're fading adult prompts towards independence. Thomas will initiate, persist, and complete math assignment with fading prompts towards independence. And the ultimate goal is for him to be independent with it, start it, persist it, and complete it on his own without any prompts. Adults fade back, adults do less, adults do nothing, kid does it all themselves. That's what we need. So with prompt dependence, adults are acting as the child's executive functioning system, which is appropriate for much younger kids, of course. But the longer this is done over time into the preteen and teenage years and young adult years, the longer this is done, the longer the development of these skills will be delayed. So all you parents out there listening, think right now about your child and what areas are they most prompt dependent? What are you doing for them that they are capable of doing on their own? Whether it's packing lunch for the next day, making lunch the next day, their morning routine, their afternoon routine, transitioning off of screens, whatever it may be. What are you doing? Where are you prompting in areas where they are capable to do it themselves? And how can you fade back? And how can your child do more themselves? So one thing I mentioned earlier, executive functions are the true predictor of success, right? They're the greatest predictor of success that we have. So let's narrow this down. What does the research tell us are the true predictors of success? And before I go into this, I always like to mention, because it's true, that the term success is 100% subjective. So success looks different to every single person. Success is not always financial. It could be health related or relationship related or whatever it may be. Just achieving your dreams overall, your unique individualized dreams. So success is a subjective term. But what does research show us for what kind of people are able to move out of their parents' house, gain employment, keep employment, pay the bills over time, and live independently? Number one is the ability to independently form and maintain social relationships. So incredibly important, having that social network and the ability to not only make friends, but keep friends over time. So incredibly important to long-term success. Everybody needs a social network, whether you're introverted, extroverted, whatever it may be. Everybody needs relationships outside of the family dynamic. This is healthy to your mental health and your long-term success. Number two, the ability to independently manage your emotions. So we all know as adults that life gets hard sometimes. There's inevitable challenges and obstacles and stress. You know, school is hard, relationships are hard, friends are hard, life is hard. Everyone has bad days. Can we manage our emotions to persevere through those days, to have the resilience to manage our emotions over time, to respond as our best self? Number three, the ability to manage your life and independent problem solving. So when you're older, can you figure out when you need to go to the grocery store, when you need to, fill your car with gas, when you need to reach out to friends to maintain that relationship, When you need to be able to pay the bills or gain new employment or work extra hours or whatever it may be, can you independently problem solve and manage your own life and figure things out on your own? So these three right here are what the longitudinal studies tell us about long-term success. So the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, children who develop strong executive functions experience lifelong benefits. And there is no better time than now to get your child the help that they need, because we understand the ADHD brain now better than we did 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There is no better time to get your child the help that they need to strengthen their executive functions and improve long-term success. And the two number one things that the Harvard Center research tell us, it's all about varied experiences. And that's why earlier I talked about every day looks the same for them. They go to school, they come home, they stay home. Varied experiences and interpersonal relationships are by far the most important thing when it comes to executive functioning skills. We need kids to have varied experiences. We need them to be in new, challenging, unique, difficult experiences where they can tolerate discomfort, persevere, and we need them to meet lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different, types of people, to meet them and get to know them personally and learn about their experiences and build relationships with them instead of just being an acquaintance or a Fortnite friend or a Minecraft friend, someone you talk to with a headset on. We need real face-to-face relationships. So I do, for this, so we can have some Q&A, I'll skip ahead to this part down here. Okay, so this right here is the true list of the executive functioning skills. Okay, so like I said earlier, you can look at a Smart but Scattered, you can look at, all the different people out there, and they're going to give you the list of executive functioning skills. My personal favorite is Dr. Russell Barkley, the worldwide leader on ADHD, his list of executive functioning skills, because it makes the most sense. So let's run through exactly what these skills are. So number one, we need our kids to learn self-awareness, self-directed attention, the ability to bring attention to the self. You're aware of yourself in your environment. You're able to perceive your environment and what's around you and who's around you and what's supposed to get done and what needs to get done. And after we gain our self-awareness, we're able to then stop ourselves, inhibit ourselves, restrain ourselves, stop ourselves from what we would have done on impulse. And there's that word impulse that we hear all the time with ADHD, right? So there's the stop. Number 1 and 2 is the stop. And number 3 and 4 is the think. So that old vague phrase, stop and think, 1 and 2 is the stop, 3 and 4 is the think. And 3 and 4 is the foundation of all executive functioning. 3 and 4 is the foundation of what's happening in the ADHD brain. Number 3 is nonverbal working memory. And this is so unbelievably important for you guys to understand. If you guys come away with anything from this presentation, understand that ADHD and executive functioning is all about nonverbal working memory. Nonverbal working memory is the visual imagery system of the brain. Our ability to hold images in mind, manipulate them, and create mental movies. A great way to think about it is it's our hindsight. It's our ability to re-image the past so we can learn from past experiences and gain competence and confidence from past experiences. We can also learn from our past mistakes and not repeat them because we remember how it made us feel and it made us feel not so good. So it's our hindsight of the past where we learn from the past. And it's also our foresight, our ability to look into the future so we can figure out what the future looks like. Make a mental movie, a mental image of what the future is supposed to look like. Okay, if the future looks like that, then right now I need to do this. So the future thinking skills allows us to plan, prioritize, and problem solve. So the ability to make a mental movie. And this is what's significantly impaired in ADHD, the ability to re-image the past, forecast into the future. And that's why these kids are stuck in the now. They are time blind. They are now versus not now. And this is part of what leads to the screen addiction, because they're not thinking about the future. They don't have future thinking skills. So they're going to do what's fun now because they can't comprehend how it negatively impacts them later. Let me play Fortnite for 10 hours after school and not do any of my homework because they don't see that I'll get in trouble at school tomorrow. Everyone else is going to have their work done except for me. They don't think about that. It doesn't happen because of the lack of nonverbal working memory. And human beings have the strongest nonverbal working memory system out of any living species. This is a true human-based skill, our ability to hold images in mind and manipulate it. This is what we do as human beings. So incredibly important. The next is verbal working memory, which is simply our internal speech, our self-speech, our ability to talk to ourselves. We can have an internal dialogue internally, privately, silently in our brains that only we can hear, and we can regulate our emotions, we can calm ourselves down, we can motivate ourselves, we can plan, prioritize, and problem solve. First, with verbal working memory, we say, okay, the future looks like that. If it looks like that, visual imagery, then right now I need to do this, self-talk. So nonverbal and verbal need to work together in harmony. Visual imagery, self-speech together in harmony. And in the ADHD brain, they are weakened and disconnected, and they're not working together. And that's what causes the impulsiveness, the laziness, right? That's what causes the time blindness, the conditional thinking, all of those things. So when it comes to ADHD and you learn something tonight, nonverbal, verbal working memory, internal language, we have to strengthen these two skills and teach them to work together in harmony, because this is what's missing. Visual imagery, self-talk together. So when those two skills do work together in harmony and they are strengthened, kids learn to regulate their emotions. They learn to be able to manipulate their own emotional state, to use words, images, self-awareness, and to process and alter how they feel, so they can respond as their best selves. Kids get to a certain age where the tantrums, the crying, and the screaming becomes inappropriate. And the constant fighting and the cursing and the yelling and the throwing things, it becomes inappropriate. They have to be able to use the nonverbal and the verbal to regulate their emotions and respond as their best selves. And the next is self-motivation, motivating themselves internally. So this is another external to internal. Young kids are motivated by external things, the stickers, the star charts, the candy. As we get older, we have to be able to internally self-motivate and motivate ourselves towards really hard things without an external reward. You get to the age where a star chart and a sticker chart becomes inappropriate. We have to be able to internally self-motivate. And the last is my favorite to talk about. We all know that when kids are in kindergarten and preschool, we all know that play is the most important thing for kids, right? Kids have to play. Play is exercise for the brain. Play develops executive functioning. Why? Because this is another external to internal. All of that manual play with toys and blocks and cars and dinosaurs, all of that manual play, once again, goes from external to internal. External manual play to internal mental play. Planning, problem solving, creativity, prioritizing. Simply put, executive functioning is mental play, period. Adults play just like kids do, but we do it internally. When we plan and problem solve and come up with a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, we're doing mental play. And that's executive functioning. We're coming up with multiple different scenarios to solve a problem. And we're doing it all up here, all mental play. Okay, so here's my information here. Thanks for, I went a little bit over past the time. I cut into the Q&A time. I apologize. get on a bit of a roll there. But my email is mike@grownowADHD.com. I love to keep in touch with anybody who's, who participates in these programs that I put together. My website is GrowNOW ADHD. Follow me on Instagram @GrowNOW ADHD. I would love to hear from you guys and, learn more about what's going on and share information and collaborate. So please keep in touch. Once again, thank you so much to Katie and everyone at Y River. You guys have been awesome to work with. What a fantastic program, amazing school that they have there. And it's a privilege to be here tonight and to be one of these selected speakers. So thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you so much. And we've had a lot of engagement in the chat. I've had some private messages too. So it looks like our parents are thrilled that you're here. There was a question earlier that I'll read out, and then we can open it up for hand raises. But there was a question about the difference between ADHD and level 1 autism as it relates to executive functioning.
Yeah, of course. So what distinguishes ADHD from your level 1 autistic student? So autism is a different type of brain disorder. Autism is more of a global delay, where it's more language-based with your expressive, receptive language, some social pragmatic language, those sorts of things. So the brain is more neurodiverse in a different way. And ADHD is your typical, is not your typical, but ADHD is your preeminent executive functioning delay. So with level 1 autism, you're most likely going to have some shades of ADHD there. You're going to have some shades of executive functioning challenges there, but you're probably going to have some other challenges as well. So ADHD in and of itself is an executive functioning developmental delay. And with autism comes ADHD, comes executive functioning challenges. There's most likely going to be some other things going on there that also need to be addressed.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions on there?
Someone is wondering if you've heard of the Silva method.
I have not heard of the Silva method. Maybe I have and I don't even realize it, but that does not sound familiar.
Those are the questions I see in the chat. So I apologize if I've missed any, but please go ahead and raise your hand, or if you'd like, just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one at this time.
Once again, thanks everyone for being here, and this was a great experience, and big thank you to Y River and everyone who participated tonight. So I just want to give a nice shout out to everybody. I hope everyone really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And Michael, when you do parent trainings, are they typically, do you have them as single sessions, or do they run in a series?
They're typically single sessions because every family has their own unique challenges. So I do lots of single parent coaching, but I do lots of overall parent trainings where I'll travel the country and internationally, where I don't only work with school districts and school staff and school leadership, but I'll also do longer presentations for parents where I go deeper into parent training and parent coaching strategies. And I have lots of reels on my Instagram of parent coaching stuff on there. So I really always tailor it towards the individual. So I do larger scale parent coaching trainings and also one-on-one through Zoom.
Fantastic. So you mentioned one takeaway that parents can start to think about now and integrate into their life in terms of adding variety of experiences and variety of personalities and connections. Are there any other tips that you could offer in this brief amount of time that we have remaining in terms of helping to strengthen that self-awareness or any of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Internal dialogue.
Of course, yeah. So one of the easiest things for parents to do, and parents will strengthen this skill over time, is to externalize their nonverbal and verbal working memory. So anytime that you're around your child and you recognize that you're talking to yourself and you're, maybe your child's, watching TV next to you or doing something next to you and you're in the kitchen doing something and you realize you're talking to yourself in your brain about, what's missing and when you have to go to the grocery store and what you're planning on doing, externalize it and talk to yourself out loud and show your child. Maybe you're in traffic and you got to figure out a new route, and your kid's sitting next to you. Talk to yourself out loud instead of keeping it internalized and private. And of course, your child's going to say, who are you talking to? What are you doing? You're being weird, blah, blah, blah. And talk about, hey, I'm talking to my brain coach. This is how I figure things out. This is how I stay calm. This is how I keep myself from getting angry. This is how I figure things out. Externalize your brain coach, model it for them. And when you're talking to them, ask them questions that trigger their future thinking skills. Instead of saying, go get your shoes, go get your coat, you can say, hey, I'm wondering what you need to be able to go outside. I'm wondering if your feet are going to get soaking wet when you go outside, or you're going to be really cold when you get out there. Or instead of saying, go pack your lunch for tomorrow, say, hey, I'm wondering what you're going to do at lunch tomorrow. I'm wondering how you're going to feel during lunch. So instead of just phrasing it as a directive where you're being their executive function, phrase it more as something that triggers their nonverbal working memory, and model your self-talk as much as possible.
That's great. Thank you. And could you also please just repeat the name of the podcast that you do and the one that you co-host?
Yeah. So the first one is Education Chapter Chat with myself and Carrie Ebert, who's one of the best speech pathologists of all time. And then we have the Parenting ADHD podcast with myself and ADHD Dude, and that's going to be released very soon in the near future. So we have those two.
Fantastic. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
All right, Michael, it's been a pleasure having you, and I hope we can work together some more.
Absolutely. Would love to. Thank you for everything.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you
Thank you
so much.